Okay, technical drawing is a form of communication, and part of that communication is dimensioning. Dimensioning is communicating details about sizes and locations of features, as well as information about materials and tolerances and things like that that help communicate how a designed object should be manufactured or possibly built. And again, we're going to talk about this module 124, and I want you to read everything in here, but do not follow these directions step by step. I'm going to modify the directions and hopefully simplify them just a little bit since we're doing remote learning right now. Okay, so here are some resources to look at: printable graph paper and dimensioning examples. Okay, flow charts, and I'm going to give you another set of dimensioning guidelines as well. But let's go look at an example. So this is an isometric pictorial view of an object, and we have drawn a front, right side, and top view by projecting different views. Okay, so you can see the views are all in alignment. And a couple things that we have not talked about yet are line types. One type of line that outlines the main feature of your objects, that's called an object line, and it's the heaviest and darkest line. But if you notice right here, there's a hole in this. And you can only see the hole if you're looking at it from the right side. But looking down from the top and looking at the front, even though you can't see the hole, we're representing or communicating that there is a hole there by having these dashed lines, which are called hidden lines, because it's a hidden feature that you can't see from that point of view. And this little line that has long and short dashes is called a center line, and it denotes where the center of a hole is. Okay, so as we look at the rest of this stuff, we have dimensions that show just the size of the object and things like the location of the center of the hole. So dimensions are basically what tell you the measurements. And we have these things called extension lines that come off of the object so you can see, what's being pointed to or indicated. So this is an extension line and this is a dimension line. So the dimension lines always have little arrow tips that touch the extension lines. Okay, so there's some rules that sort of have a hierarchy of importance when you're adding dimensions to an object. And right now we're dealing with simple objects, so we're going to deal with simple rules. And as they get more complex, it gets a lot more technical, but I want you to just learn the basics at this point. So one basic rule, okay, if you remember, if you did right angle projection, you had little thin light lines that were barely visible going in between your views that you later darkened in to complete the views of your objects. These little light lines can be reused to create your extension lines. Okay, all these lines in between your views, which comes up to one of the main rules. Dimensions should be placed in between the views and not out in the margins except when absolutely necessary. So always start by placing dimensions in the views. So like this dimension right here showing 3 inches, you can see that it also corresponds to this length up here. This height showing 1.5 inches also corresponds to this height over here. Okay. And we also have dimensions showing like how far it is to this little notch. So another rule is to place shorter dimensions closer to the object and longer dimensions further away from the object. So they're kind of stacked up like a little staircase. Okay. Another rule, these two extension lines crisscross, which is perfectly fine. You do not see any crisscrossing dimension lines. Do not crisscross dimension lines. Only extension lines. Okay. Let's look at dimensioning holes. We need to know how big the hole is. We also need to know where is the center of it, because not everything is 3D printed automatically. Sometimes we have machinists that make things manually, or they have to program CNC machines, or they just have to check the quality of a produced part. So they need to be able to have these dimensions to even just do the quality checks on them. So this leader line has a symbol for diameter in front of it, and it tells us how big this hole is. A leader line giving a diameter dimension for a hole is always at an angle. It's never horizontal or vertical. It must be at an angle. Okay? And the center lines of this hole coming off of the center lines, we have an extension line touching the center lines because we need to know where the center of the hole is. Now, here is a case where we have a dimension in the margin. In this example, it's allowed because there's not another good place to put it. Because if you put it up here, it's you have extension lines crisscrossing over features of the object. So in this instance, it's okay to put it in the margin, but in any other situation, always see if it can be put in between the views first, okay? And like this dimension right here, 1 inch, corresponds to this depth right there. So if you put it right here or right here, that's considered between the views, because remember, right angle projection goes this way, okay? In the dimensioning flow chart, there's a couple of ambiguous items. It says do not under dimension and do not over dimension. Well, what that means is don't leave anything off that's critical or necessary for somebody to understand, inspect, or manufacture a part, but also don't duplicate dimensions. So for right here, for example, I have this 3-inch dimension of length. I don't have to duplicate it up there because I've already put it in the front view. Where I have this 1-inch dimension for the depth, I don't have to replicate it up here because I've already got it. So don't replicate dimensions that you've already done, okay? Those are some of the basics right now. So we're just going to stick to the basics because you're going to add dimensions to your right angle multi-view drawings that you've done for the first 10 objects in the previous assignment.